This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point Shea Stadium.
All right, back again, the Subway To Shea Podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. You can follow the show on Twitter at Subway To Shea. Listen and subscribe to the show on Anchor.fm, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Breaker, and Pocket Cast. Turn on those notifications and never miss an episode of Subway To Shea. Please take a few minutes to write me a review. Let me know what you think of the show. I got a couple reviews here already. Tom G817 says, great listen all the time. Great content, great guests. Vivid Hater, he doesn't hate this show, but he says Mets fan for life. If you are a die-hard Mets fan, then you need to listen to Subway To Shea, best podcast, hands down. Thank you to both Tom G817 and Vivid Hater for the reviews. I appreciate it. So please, if you're listening to the show, please take a few moments, rate the show on Apple Podcasts, leave me a review, let me know what you think, things you like, things you don't like. I'd love to know how to make this show better and better every day. You can also find Subway To Shea on YouTube. This podcast is now available every Thursday on the HSP Network. Catch me alongside new podcasts like The Bullpen with DA, Third Floor Lounge, which covers the NFL and NBA, and Sus Talk. So just search High Spot Podcast on YouTube or youtube.com/High Spot Podcast and make sure to subscribe today. Joining me now on the Subway To Shea Podcast, Jeffrey Bellone. Jeffrey is the co-founder of Mets Fix, which provides Mets fans with in-depth analysis, reporting, unique graphics, and film breakdowns. It is a great resource that I love to use, and I also subscribe to their free newsletter, which you can too. Jeffrey, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I really appreciate you coming on. Tell us how Mets Fix came about.
Yeah, it's actually a funny story. So I had, from a long time, been writing about the Knicks through Knicks Film School, it's called. And we had a Twitter account that was fairly popular where I do film breakdowns. And then we started a newsletter with Jonathan Macri and a few others. And then I said, it'd kind of be cool if we could do this for, another team like the Mets. So I started my own Mets newsletter. And then randomly one day, someone else reached out to me who ended up being my partner, Blake Zeff. And he said, hey, I was thinking of doing the same thing. I searched Substack to see if anyone else is doing it. I found your newsletter and I figured I don't want to compete against this one if we just did it together. So yeah, we kind of two strangers, but two Mets fans kind of came together and then now we're doing it together.
Well, you guys put together some great content and I really love your stuff. So let's get into the Mets right now and let's talk about Carlos Carrasco and his injury. So after throwing bullpen last week and conditioning, he suffered what was initially thought to be a right hamstring strain. And then Mike Puma came out on the New York Post and reported that the injury was a high-grade tear, which will probably keep him out 6 to 8 weeks. Carlos has had elbow soreness and now this tear. So should we be worried about this tear affecting him when he returns? Is this going to be something that's going to linger throughout the season for him?
Yeah, that's a good question because, when he had his initial elbow soreness, we actually wrote about it in the newsletter. That's something that he's had happen quite often in the spring. And he's kind of had this weird thing where he's had a bunch of injuries to his right arm and elbow that have never turned into anything. I mean, only time he really missed any time, he had a line drive off his right arm. He missed a few starts from that. I think that was in 2018. And then he missed time, with his cancer diagnosis, obviously. But otherwise, he's been pretty healthy. So this is a new type of injury with the hamstring. And I think we've experienced it as Mets fans, right? Even back with Reyes and whatnot, where you hear a hamstring injury and you just don't know. Pitchers obviously rely a lot on their legs. So it's something actually, funny enough, I want to research a little more to see how different pitchers have come back from this particular injury, but I haven't done that yet. But, I do worry a little more than when we got that initial news, because we had at least had a track record of him having inflammation and it not impacting him, where this is, something different.
Now, usually when injuries like this happen, I become very worried about the rotation, but this year kind of feels a little different. We have better depth compared to, let's say, obviously last year in 2019. What do you make of the way the Mets constructed the rotation depth now than in previous years?
Yeah, I mean, I think they did a good job making sure that when you get to the back of the rotation and you need a spot starter or you need a guy to fill in, one or two turns, that instead of having someone who really sucks, for lack of a better word, you now have someone who, belongs in the back of a major league rotation, if Yamamoto or Lucchesi, and even a little further down. So I think they've done a good job with that, but I do think that's different than having the type of depth that can replace a Carrasco, right? So like you look at the Dodgers, I mean, they're in a situation now where they have David Price, who could be coming out of the bullpen and on top of a guy like Dustin May, who would be probably the third starter or fourth starter on the Mets when they're healthy. So I think they have good depth in a sense of that fourth or fifth turn in a rotation should be better. But when you lose a Carrasco, that top end depth now, and remember, Stroman has looked good in the spring, and I like his, he seems like someone who's always working to improve his game. So I have confidence he's going to be good. But he didn't pitch for a whole year. So you are a little bit going into the season now where you're wondering about that top end depth behind DeGrom. Does that quickly turn into, where you no longer have that advantage you maybe thought you did?
Like you mentioned with Stroman, him having taken the year off, is it more worried that he might struggle, or is it more that he got the year off, so he's now very rested and ready to go? Is the two combined, or you feel like they're different?
I think it's just probably more like you just don't have a track record of what it will mean, good or bad, right? I mean, it's just not obviously common that a healthy pitcher doesn't pitch, in major league games for that long. So we just don't know in general how, for any pitcher, even the ones who pitched last year, I think the leader had something like 88 innings, where usually you're getting over 200 innings, right? So how the bodies respond differently doesn't mean guys are going to be more prone to injury as they ramp up. Maybe April, May, they're okay because that's sort of early enough in the year. But as you start tacking on innings when they didn't have the normal schedule from last year, you wonder how that impacts them. So I guess it's more that worry. It's different than what they normally have done, in particular to Stroman. By him not pitching the whole season, he's got, I think, even more of a difference. And like I said, it could turn out that that's a good thing, that he kind of has more energy saved. We just don't know, and I guess that's why I put somewhat of a question mark on it.
Now, on the other hand, David Peterson jumped in last year, and he was pretty solid. He comes up from Double-A, and he pitched pretty well. And manager Luis Rojas now saying he's most likely going to slot into that number 4 spot in the rotation. Who do you feel has the leg up for the 5th slot?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I know they've, are flirting with the idea of using an opener. Lucchesi, I think, to me personally, I like Yamamoto a little bit better just because I think he has a deeper repertoire of pitches, which is, more conducive when you're just a traditional starter. I think Lucchesi has 2 I mean, he's got that weird, the curve, the change-up curveball, and he's got a sinker, but he doesn't really have a good third pitch. And if you look at the numbers, he's really been impacted when he gets that third time through the order, which, all pitchers now, they obviously pay close attention to, but particularly for him, it's been a problem. So I personally like Yamamoto a little better at this point in time, but could they do, like I said, some sort of opener tandem where they can fit an extra guy in that way? I could see that, but they've both pitched well, but I think it's between those two in my eyes of who would get the fifth spot.
So is it better to have two lefties in the rotation? I know you rather go with Yamamoto, which means the only lefty would be David Peterson. But is it good to maybe decide go Lucchesi with the two lefties going in the rotation?
I personally don't think that's something that I would put over who I just think is better, for that role. I mean, what you like about Lucchesi is he has a different delivery too. So you're bringing, if you're saying, okay, we're facing a team, a 3-game series with our 3, 4, 5 starters, that gives a completely different look, right? So you like that. But again, you could capitalize on that, bringing him out of the bullpen, which is what I like him better in that role. So I personally wouldn't be as worried about the lefty when you're, lefty righty when you're getting to that spot. I think you're just going with the guy who you think's going to give you the most innings.
And in your newsletter, you mentioned Mike Montgomery being stretched out, and that kind of brings to line the opener. What is the possibility of making him a part of this pitching staff as either a bullpen piece or putting him as the opener? How well do you think he's done this spring?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing that's been interesting this spring is the Mets have actually had a lot of guys who have pitched, pretty well, where it's made the decision, I think a little less obvious, I guess what I was going to say is even with Lucchesi, it's like his line yesterday, when you look at the line, it wasn't great, but I know Rojas talked afterwards, just looking at his pitches, he thought he was good enough. So someone like Montgomery, some of these other non-roster invites, I could totally see them fitting, because I think, again, this year, it's not like who comes out of spring is going to be the 5 that you're running with all year. We know Carrasco and Syndergaard are eventually going to come back. We know other guys could get injured. And we know they have a lot of depth. And the reason you have that depth is because you can decide, okay, yeah, if you like how Montgomery is throwing right now, maybe you use him, for a couple starts, and then you're cycling in someone else. I mean, obviously you have to pay attention to he's a non-roster invitee, so you have to pay attention to who you'd option. It costs a little more to have someone like that make the active roster, so you have to consider that. But I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering also with Rojas is going to have to be strategic on who he puts in this bullpen, because like you said, a lot of these pitchers have pitched really well. Some have options, some don't have options. So I'm assuming that's going to be very important in how he puts this bullpen together.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I mean, that was something else that they prioritized over the season. Over the off season, beyond just getting guys to kind of fill obvious holes. I think they did a good job trying to find guys who had options remaining, because that gives them a lot more flexibility to, like I said, cycle guys in where maybe they're only up for a portion of the season, but they're filling a gap, that exists. And before, the off season, they really had very, very little flexibility in the guys that they could bring, up and down without risk losing. And there still are a couple of guys that fall in that, Jacob Barnes is one of them. I know he's pitched better of late, but he's out of options, and they'd have to decide what to do with him. And I think he's someone that's kind of on that fringe of making an active roster.
Once again, I'm here with Jeffrey Bellone, co-founder of Mets Fix, which provides Mets fans with in-depth analysis, reporting, unique graphics, and film breakdowns. Speaking of film breakdowns, I really enjoyed your series on Brandon Nimmo's defensive struggles in center field. I'm a huge fan of Nimo. I think he is a solid offensive player, but how can he improve his defense this year?
Yeah, so I looked at a lot of the video, and it's funny because now everyone references the StatCast data. They have this outs above average metric for people who aren't familiar with it, but they essentially look at different plays, balls in play, and they say, okay, how how likely is it that this player would be able to field that ball based on where he started, based on his speed and the trajectory of the ball. So, it's a more precise way of just like looking at a fielder's number of errors or something like that. It's actually calculating how much ground they cover, etc. But for Nimmo, when I looked at it, I wanted to actually see the plays that he was missing. And he was missing a lot of plays that went over his head because he just wouldn't get a good feel for the ball off the bat. He would turn, the opposite direction, and then that would slow his path to get to the ball. So I know he's been playing deeper to account for that. And we've seen it in spring a couple times where when he's running in, I mean, all of us who've played baseball, we know this, it's always easier to see a ball in front of you. When he's running in, he does a lot better. So I do think that will help. Is he going to be, Jackie Bradley Jr. out there? No. But I also think people don't realize it's not as many plays as you would think, particularly in the outfield, that separate, a real, let's just say an above average center fielder from an average one. If you took the best center fielder in the game and compare him to the worst, there's a good amount of plays that make a difference, but it's not as much as you think just because you don't get, as many opportunities. So I think he can be serviceable out there. There's going to be the play that sticks out in a highlight and everyone will remember that in their mind and they'll think, oh God, this is terrible. But, I think overall over a full season, if he continues to build on what he's doing, he can hold his own out there.
What about Dominic Smith in left field?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one's a little bit tougher. I mean, to me, I think with Nimo, it's like he can work in the outfield. He just ideally wouldn't be in center field, right? Mm-hmm. Where with Smith, I think ideally he just wouldn't be in the outfield. He would be at first base, and maybe Alonso's DHing when the DH comes back next year. So that one, I worry about just because it's not ideal, but I'm still hopeful that there's not as many plays that it's going to make such a difference that what he provides with his bat, he can't, offset some of that. And then if the Mets, utilize their depth with defensive replacements in the right spot, I think they can be okay. But again, not an ideal situation, that's for sure.
And both Pilar and Almora Jr. have been playing so well. Is there a chance that both of these guys make this bench?
Yeah, no, I think there is. Basically for the reasons we're just saying, right, where there's situations that you could see why the Mets would want to, have defensive replacements. So therefore you're going to use them. You're not going to, normally you might not want that extra outfielder because you're playing, your basic three mostly every day, every inning. So there's not as many opportunities. But yeah, I could see them both making the bench. And I'm not really sure who else I would even, put in there, where I'd be worried about, okay, well, I'm losing this. I mean, Jose Martinez got injured. He was a guy that, I think is more first base DH at this point, but, a bat that they could have considered, but obviously he's hurt now. So I think they both have a good shot of making the team.
Yeah, right now I see the bench as Tomas Nido, because you're going to need the backup catcher. You got Guillorme, VR, Pilar, and Almora Jr. I think if they're allowed to carry the five, because usually they don't really carry that many on the bench, and not in the past, but I would assume this year those five would be set.
Yeah, no, I think you have it exactly right. And because this year they do have the relaxation on the number of pitchers you could carry. So normally it would be 13. You could carry an extra pitcher if they wanted to. So I guess that's an area where maybe you could have a shorter bench. But I think the five you mentioned are the most likely.
All right, let's head up to Francisco Lindor. Big spring he's been having so far. He's really heated up offensively, which means contract talks continue to grow. And especially during the spring, we've been hearing a lot about it. Numbers and counteroffers have been made, or so have been said. Do you think a deal will get done by opening day?
I've been thinking in my head, yes, it will. I guess there's it's funny with Sandy Alderson. It's, he does have a track record where, I think with the Wilpons, we, as Mets fans, everyone was like, well, even if Alderson wanted to spend money, what can he do with the Wilpons? But I think people are seeing a little bit now that even under Cohen, I know it's a very early in this regime, Alderson is not going to just break the bank for the sake of breaking the bank. I guess apparently unless it's Trevor Bauer. But that makes me worry a little bit that they, there's a part of me, I guess, in offseason where I'm like, you know what? Like, it's Cohen. He wants to stamp his name here. They just traded for Lindor. He's just going to, I'm not saying he's going to, make a terrible deal, but he's going to pay him what he needs to be paid to get it done. They're not going to be sitting here arguing over, is it 310 million or 320? But I don't know. Maybe now, if they're saying the Mets are around 300 and Lindor is far above that, that they got a lot of ground to make up, before opening day. But to answer your question, I'm going to say it's going to be like the night before they will announce that, a deal is done and it'll be one less thing to have to worry about.
Kind of like with DeGrom. He got his contract, although it wasn't Alderson. He got his contract, 2 days before opening day began? Yeah,
exactly. And it's kind of this is, it's negotiations, right? It's always about these artificial deadlines, which is why Lindor's camp is going to say, they're going to claim it's because he wants to focus on playing baseball. But, it's really they're setting opening day as a deadline because that's how deals get done. Last year, the same situation, right? The Dodgers traded for Mookie Betts, and it was literally the day before, and that was in July with COVID, but it was literally the day before, and they got that huge deal done. So that's, if it's going to happen, that's how it's going to happen. So anything before then at this point, I think is just kind of jockeying in the press and just, you just kind of ignore till you get to the day before.
Yeah, I'm trying to be as patient as possible. He said that the deadline was opening day, and it's not opening day yet, so I'm being as patient as possible. But I will say this about Sandy. If he goes into this with all the contracts, the Mets are not going to get anyone because these contracts just keep skyrocketing and they're getting very expensive. And if he's not going to pay these players, then who's going to come here?
Right. Because I think the other way to look at it, if you, as a Mets fan, is, well, if they don't sign Lindor, I would not call it necessarily doom and gloom unless, he's your particular favorite player. There are other shortstop that are going to be available next winter. Corey Seager, I think, has 6 home runs this spring. He was, an MVP during the playoffs last year. He's a pretty good player. You can make an argument who's better between those two. Meaning, if it doesn't work, these negotiations, I know Lindor, I think it was either reported or he had even talked about himself in terms of where he rates among shortstops, and thinking he is the best shortstop. That's all about the type of contract he gets, right, to set that market. But there's other guys that are hitting free agency at that same moment who can make a similar argument. And I think that gives a little more leverage to the Mets because they can say, well, hey, if we're willing to spend over $300 million here, there's only so many teams that are willing to do that. And there's a lot of players moving around, Trevor Story, another one. So, we're going to get one of them. And I feel like that's a position they could take. But to your point, if Sandy's going to be frugal, then yeah, maybe they do get left empty-handed.
And I've been talking about this all spring. I thought that the priority should have been Michael Conforto. I don't know what contract negotiations are going with him. He seems to not even want to talk about it anymore. But I thought he should have been the priority because next offseason, the outfield crop of players is not great, which means Conforto might be the number one outfielder and he's going to get a whole lot of money, especially under Scott Boras. So I thought that he should have been the priority, whereas in Lindor, like you said, there's going to be a slew of really good shortstops. This may be one of the best shortstop free agent class in probably history.
Yeah, no, right. Baez and Correa and Seager. Yeah, it's kind. When you think about if you grew up like I did in the '90s of the kind of that class that was funny enough. I was the kid who was rooting for Ray Ordonez, who obviously fell behind the rest of his class.
He was one of my favorite players too, growing up.
Yeah. Because I remember like in Jeter's rookie year, I was trying to pretend, that Ordonez would be on that class. But anyways, since that class of, the A-Rod, Jeter, et cetera, Nomar at the time, I think this is really a real special group, just independent of whether they're free agents. If you just listed top, shortstops, and now the fact that they all happen to be coming at the same time. I think though with Conforto, like you said with Boras, like in his age, I just think it's a situation where they probably realize he's going going to go to free agency. He just is. I mean, we just saw Springer get 150, I think it was. He's 3 years older. I guess he'd be 2 years older when by the time Conforto gets to free agency next year. So I think that's part of it too, though, is the feeling of, do they have more of an avenue with Lindor than they do a Conforto, rather than it being, did they prioritize one or the other?
Now, since they're both seeking these huge contracts, what do you feel is a fair deal for both of them, both Lindor and Conforto? What is a fair deal that the Mets could give to these guys?
This is where it's like you're negotiating with player, but also with the market, right? And especially next year with the CBA set to expire, and there's the whole uncertainty that surrounds that in terms of how the luxury tax is impacted and how these contracts then get valued. But, I think Lindor is going to look, he's going to want to make a number that puts him, not the highest paid player in baseball, but I think at a high level. So if you said 10 years, $320 million, I think that puts him in that range, the Bryce Harper type range for annual value. Conforto is a tricky one because, like I said, 6 years, 150 is Springer. Springer's a center fielder, at least for another year or two. I know some people say that he's really should be just a corner outfielder now. How much added value do you give Springer because he's, a quote center fielder, or do you not consider that as much? Do you just say, like you were saying, Conforto is going to clearly be the best outfield free agent. So, he's 2 years younger than Springer will next offseason. So in terms of when he's hitting free agency, I'm saying. So if you told me 7 years, 175, I think that's the number I used in the newsletter this morning. That to me would be, about a reasonable one for Conforto. That's $25 million per year. So you're looking at $25 million per year Conforto, maybe 30 to 32, 33 for Lindor. I mean, that's nearly $60 million on two guys. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they could get both deals done, just the one deal done. They also have Syndergaard going to be a free agent next year, Stroman. So they have a lot to think about for sure.
No, absolutely. And that was actually what I wrote in the newsletter this morning is, and I'll do the shameless plug. People can go to MetsFix.com to sign up for free for it. That was Blake, by the way. He's always good at reminding me to to plug. So I know if you listen to this and he actually listens this far, he'll give me a text tomorrow. But yeah, I wrote about that this morning. I mean, so the Mets have 6 free agents that are not named Lindor Conforto. And that is, like you said, Syndergaard, Stroman, and then it's guys that, I think people would care less about, leaving. But the point is, even if they let everyone walk, other than Lindor and Conforto, they're going to have a lot of payroll tied up already just with this current roster, around $180 million, maybe, and probably a little more than that when you have the arbitration players getting raises. So we don't know where the tax will be. It's $210 million this year. Due in the new CBA, is it around the same? Is it totally different? We don't know. But the point is, there's not a lot of wiggle room if they sign both those guys. So, Stroman, Syndergaard, Lindor, Conforto. It's hard to believe all 4 of those guys would be back next year.
Now, Jeffrey, before I let you go, let everyone know where they can reach you and MetFix on social media.
Sure, yeah. So the Twitter handle is easy. It's @MetsFix. And if you just go there, you got links to everything you need to sign up for the newsletter. Again, it's free. It comes every weekday morning at 8 a.m. We do a rundown of the latest news and then one analysis piece. So like I said, this morning we looked at the 2022 payroll. Another day it might be a film breakdown on Nimmo's defense. But yeah, so just check us out there and @Jeffrey Bellone if you just want to follow me for some odd reason. But @MetsFix is where you could get the newsletter stuff.
All right, Jeffrey, I can't thank you enough for joining the show. Let's do this again soon, man.
All right, yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot.
That was Jeffrey Bellone, co-founder of MetsFix, which provides Mets fans with in-depth analysis, reporting, unique graphics, and film breakdowns. It's a great resource that I love to use because I need to get my Mets fix. That's the shameless plug right there. So make sure to subscribe to Mets Fix free newsletter. Free is always good. So you'll get it, like he said, you'll get this newsletter every morning around 8 a.m. and you can read all the great pieces from Jeffrey and his partner at MetFix. Final thoughts before we wrap up this show. Fans in the stands for opening day. Yes, it is. Governor Andrew Cuomo announced that the Mets and the Yankees can host up to 20% capacity. And for the Mets, I think that's a little over 8,000 people in the stands. So there will be fans at Citi Field for opening day. You got to be excited for that. We're trying our best to get back to their normal life and getting to be a part of these baseball games, not just watching them, on TV. I know a lot of it will probably be mostly to start. It will be a lot of the season ticket holders, but just having fans in the stands is such a rush and such a fun time when you're at Citi Field and at these Mets games. So I'm very excited for that. And I hope to go to a Mets game or two this year, I really want to get out there to Citi Field. I don't think I've been there since maybe August of 2019 was the last time I got to see a game at Citi Field. Mike Piazza is in camp this week. He will be in hand at Citi Field for the 20th anniversary of 9/11. They're going to have a ceremony which takes place on 9/11 when the Mets play the New York Yankees. So that is going to be an emotional night. We all know Mike Piazza hit that emotional home run. Probably, I'm going to say that is the biggest home run of his career as a Met. I think that was by far the most emotional and the biggest home run that he had here as a New York Mets. He also chatted it up with players including Jacob deGrom, catcher James McCann, and Francisco Lindor, who's kind of in the same situation as Piazza was in 98. Piazza came here via the trade, although during midseason, but they're both going through the same thing. They were traded here. They're going to be free agents at the end of the year. And, Piazza ended up signing that huge contract. I think it was $91 million at the time. And he stayed with the Mets. And hopefully the same thing happens to Lindor. So that pretty much wraps it up here for the Subway to Shea podcast. Once again, a huge thank you to Jeffrey Bellone from Mets Fix. And we'll talk next week. Please take a few minutes to write me a review. Let me know what you think of the show, what you like, what you don't like. I want to make this show better for you Met fans out there. Now, I read you a couple of reviews at the beginning of the show. I appreciate everyone who writes a review, everyone who leaves me a 5-star review, because that brings my ranking in podcasts, Mets, baseball, you name it. I want to keep climbing the rankings up there, and I want to keep creating good Mets content for you guys. Do me a favor. Please take those few minutes, write me a review, rate the show. Let me know what you think, okay? Follow the show on Twitter at Subway to Shea. Listen and subscribe to the show on Anchor.fm, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Breaker, and Pocket Cast. Turn on notifications to never miss an episode of Subway to Shea. You can also find Subway to Shea on YouTube. This podcast is now available every Thursday on the HSP Network. Catch me alongside other podcasts like The Bullpen with DA, Third Floor Lounge, which covers the NFL and the NBA, and Sus Talk. So just search High Spot Podcast on YouTube or youtube.com/High Spot Podcast and make sure to subscribe today. Listen, subscribe, share, and review Subway to Shea. For Anthony Rivera, let's go Mets.